We have some breaking news tonight. At a fundraiser in New York this evening, President Biden just made some extraordinary and highly alarming comments about Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine and the threat of nuclear war. Biden said the risk of nuclear Armageddon is at the highest level since 1962. Quote, "For the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, we have a direct threat of the use of a nuclear weapon if, in fact, things continue down the path they are going. We haven't faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." Joining us now to help parse those comments and understand where we are at is Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor for President Obama. Ben, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Alex.
First, your reaction to President Biden using the word Armageddon and recalling 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, I think that's a shorthand, right? Armageddon is a shorthand for, the potential for nuclear conflagration. The reality here is we do have a threat from Vladimir Putin about the use of a nuclear weapon. The distinction I draw from the Cuban Missile Crisis is that was the U.S. and the Soviet Union, two superpowers in a nuclear standoff where a nuclear exchange could have been Armageddon. What we have here is a threat really of the potential use of a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. That would obviously be an awful escalation for the people of Ukraine and a potential risk of the escalation of that conflict. But, we're not quite at the level of, again, I think, concern of where things got in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I think what he's reflecting is this is the first time in a very long time, decades, that we've had to take seriously the possibility that a nuclear weapon can be used. And that is something that people should be taking very seriously.
I would say, Ben, to that end, Biden did talk about tactical nukes and said, I don't think there's any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah,
or do you think that...
the situation...
Go ahead.
Well, you can parse this. I think what people should keep in mind is a nuclear weapon that is of the kind that we were talking about in the Cuban Missile Crisis is the kind of weapon that destroys cities, right? Strategic nuclear weapons. A tactical nuclear weapon could be of a yield that is a fraction of the yield of the atomic bomb that we used in Hiroshima. Look, any nuclear weapons use is horrific and a catastrophe and is ushering us into a new age that we don't want to be in. And it's horrible for anybody who's in the vicinity, not just of that explosion, but of the nuclear fallout for it. I think the risk of Armageddon comes from whether or not A, that weapon is used, and B, things escalate to the point where the United States and Russia are in a conflict, right? And so I do think we have lots of steps to go here. We've seen threats from Putin. We have not necessarily seen the U.S. Making reference to the fact that Russia's nuclear arsenal has been put on a different posture. So we have not seen Russia acting on that threat yet. And then there's a secondary question of what might happen after the use of a nuclear weapon. So we have further to go before I think we're getting into the kinds of nuclear standoff scenarios that we, all learned about from the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I think what the president's comments do reflect is, for the first time in a very long time, we're even having this conversation. And this is not a conversation that anybody wants to be having.
Indeed. I mean, and he wondered aloud at the same fundraiser just moments ago, I'm trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp? Where does he find a way out? Where does he find himself in a position that he does not only lose face, but lose significant power within Russia? I mean, that's something I think we've all wondered. And do you think at this point there is an off-ramp for Putin? Do you think he's even looking for one?
Nothing that Putin's doing suggests that, with the mobilization that he's done within Russia, with how much he's personally invested in this war. I think the reality everybody understands is there, frankly, is really no safe, face-saving path out for Putin. He's already failed. He failed to conquer Ukraine. He failed to conquer Kyiv. Now he's failing to even hold the territories that he wanted to annex in Ukraine. He doesn't even control the territory that he announced before the Russian people in the world he was annexing. And so you want an off-ramp of sorts, obviously, from an escalation and the use of nuclear weapons. But a face-saving situation for Vladimir Putin might not be possible right now. And that's a circumstance where you don't know whether, if Putin is cornered, he decides to escalate to the use of nuclear weapons. Frankly, we also don't know. Somebody has to follow that order inside of Russia, right? So there's a lot of uncertainties here. There's a lot of dangers for Vladimir Putin in taking that step. China, his biggest benefactor in the world, I'm sure, does not want to see this happen. No country in the world wants to see the taboo around nuclear weapons broken. So Vladimir Putin has a lot of risks, too, as he considers whether to take that step. But this question of how the war in Ukraine ends, I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. Not Joe Biden, not Vladimir Putin, not Volodymyr Zelensky. So that, I think, is what makes this such an uncertain situation.
Yeah, you mentioned Xi Jinping, and Modi in India to some degree is also someone that's cooled Putin's jets to, I guess, marginally in all of this. Would you expect that there are bilateral talks or trilateral talks going on between the U.S., China, and India to make sure that someone is talking to Vladimir Putin and trying to talk him off the ledge in terms of nuclear?
Alex, it's a really good point, because what we've seen is reports of, the U.S. sending messages to Russia, warning them against doing this. I'm sure that's happening. I'm also sure that's what's happening is the U.S. is reaching out to China and saying, look, we have not been getting along very well lately. We may even have different views about the war in Ukraine and the sanctions that we've imposed. China's continued to buy Russian oil, probably far above what we would want in the United States. But nobody would win from a scenario in which there's a use of nuclear weapons, even a smaller tactical nuclear weapon inside of Ukraine. It would usher in a new world in which the nuclear taboo has been broken. It could escalate the conflict between NATO and Russia. China really does not want that either. And so I think the U.S. going to China and having the Chinese lean on the Russians together with us and other countries is part of what's happening right now.